Mm. Hi, and welcome everybody. I'm here today with astrologers Mundane, Comtois, and Dayana Robinson. And together they are solely lunar, and they offer astrological teachings to the community right here from the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island. And of course, due to the technological advances of our age, they are globally accessible through their YouTube channel. So if you haven't yet, check them out. I highly recommend you do so and subscribe to their channel. They're very insightful, wise teachers, and I just personally really enjoy the dynamic that they have between the two of them, really bringing these different masculine and feminine perspectives to the astrological teachings and insights. My name is Regina Terra, and I live here on Vancouver Island by the mystical Cuxhaila River. And I am in gratitude to this land and its compassionate ancestral spirit that embraces us as we all cohabitate here and learn to walk the earth in a good way. I'm a first generation immigrant. And it's an honor really, and an interesting melding pot, I would say here. My gratitude also goes to the moon and the great star nation all around us. I'm a healing artist, a mother, a sister, a daughter, I'm a seer, and generally a lover of the true and wild nature and of the mysteries. And I offer craniosacral therapy from our forest home and a variety of healing arts gatherings and ceremonies. And I have been hosting for a little bit over a year now a moon circle on this online platform that is Zoom. And we're a group of women that meet with the new moon and the full moon, and we journey together and share in each other's life stories. And my overall intention with creating this container has been to attune my own rhythms more intimately with the lunar cycles, to learn about myself and to be more aware of how I fluctuate and how that relates to and is interconnected with the rhythms all around me, the moon being the closest to the earth. And I really wanted to do that work with other women. I feel lunar work is inherently women's work. And so it's been very delightful unfolding and learning. And a nice little side effect has been that I've been learning a little bit more about astrology, because I informed myself about the current astrology around the new moon and the full moon before these circles, and then we share and we talk about it. So I come from a very amateur, curious, intuitive perspective to astrology, and I've been finding many questions along the way. And recently I approached Martin with one of these questions, and as we were going through that exchange back and forth, we realized that there is an opportunity here for a little mini series of teachings around astrology as it relates to the moon, lunar astrology. And I realized in that conversation too that it's a much larger field and has many more aspects than I even realized. And so today here in the context of this circle, which is usually private, of course, but we're going to record the teaching aspect so that it can become part of Dayana's and Martin's teaching library and that YouTube channel. Today we're having a little first introductory lunar astrology teaching with us in the circle, and of course available to the larger community. I'm very excited, and I guess without any further ado, I'm going to pass the talking stick to Martin and Dayana to introduce themselves and maybe to jump right in with a little overview of what lunar astrology is and the many different aspects that are part of that topic.
Thank you, Tara, for such a beautiful introduction. Such an honor to be invited. You gave us a list of questions, which we'll bring up right now. But and you introduced us really well. Dayana's the co-pilot and handling all of the. So yeah, well, let's just dive into it. You want to bring the questions up?
Yeah.
So we started our discussion with, so we're a Healer and a Dreamer. Astrology is the video channel that we work with. And then Soul E Luna Inspiration is our video series on the new moons and the full moons. And here's our list of questions. And maybe So, so you start with, can you give us an overview of what lunar astrology is about? So maybe you can expand on that question, or should I just drop into it?
Yeah, I guess the only expansion I would have is that when I came to you with a question on the lunar cycles, you made me aware that lunar astrology, or astrology through the lens of the moon, is a whole field of study in astrology. And you started mentioning all these different aspects. And so in regards to this mini series that we're going to have, and you joining us throughout the year in these moon circles for a series of teachings as we, define our questions, I guess I felt that it would be nice to have a general overview of everything that's encompassed in lunar astrology and maybe the terminology and all of those kind of things.
So, lunar astrology is more of an ancient astrology. In the early days of astrology, the order of the planets were much different. So, now we start with the sun, because we know the sun is at the center, and then we have Mercury and Venus, and then we have the sun and the moon, and then Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the outer planets. In traditional astrology, in olden astrology, moon came first, then Mercury and Venus, and then the sun, and then Mars, and then Jupiter, then Saturn. And of course, there was only 7 planets back then. So astrology, in that sense, the dynamic was much different. And again, astrology developed over thousands of years. And when the Copernican revolution took place, and we found out that the sun was the center of the universe, then astrology started really becoming much more massive. And then with the rise of technology, now we know about the outer planets. We know Chiron, we know Uranus, we know Neptune, we know Pluto, all planets that we can't see with the naked eye. So that changed astrology greatly. But so in the early days, astrology started out with the moon. And the disciplines were much, much different, in that the moon was considered me and my body. Now we look at it as a sacred feminine, and it's associated with mothering. But back then, the moon was what gave birth to my body. And so then the moon signified me. And so then people read charts much differently. And so, that's the change, or to look at the different perspective. Now, from that, as astrology evolved, it started getting different names. So I put 4 names that are basically lunar astrology. And because the moon, the moon goes through a sign in 2 days. She goes through the whole, 2 days and a little more. And she goes through the whole zodiac in 28 days. And then really originally, the year was calculated according to the moon. And so we had 13 months. It became 12 in the Christian era, but the lunar months were well established and ancient. And again, they were based on the revolution of the moon. And as the moon goes through the zodiac, it makes angular relationship with other planets. We know at the new moon, it makes conjunction with the sun. We know at the full moon, it's in opposition to the sun. But as the moon travels through the sign, it makes opposition to Mercury and Venus. It makes opposition to Chiron and Jupiter. Then it makes a square to Mercury and Jupiter and Venus. And so then the ancient looked at the movement of the moon and what angles it made to the other planets. And that's what they interpreted as, so there's 4 different astrologies that I bring up, and maybe you can bring up the file.
Yeah, I can show it.
Yeah. So then we have electional astrology. So this movement of the moon through the signs, we can elect a time, electional astrology. So when would be a good day for us to have a date? So moon in conjunction with Venus, wow, that'll be a great time. When should we get married? What day is a good day to open my business? So these are electional astrology decisions, and they're based on the travel of the moon, and the astrologer reads the relationship with that, those planets, and then establishes, okay, open your business at 10 o'clock on Monday, or, so that's electional astrology. Mundane astrology has many different features: financial, political. Mundane astrology also strongly based on mundane astrology. And then there's biodynamic agriculture. So we got the school of Steiner and Theosophy, who teaches to plant. Dayana just gave me a beautiful book, Stella Natura, Biodynamic Planting Guide. So then we have books on when to plant according to where the moon is. And then we have what is called Horary astrology. Horary astrology is astrology as an oracle. And it includes some of all of these 3 previous, and really all of these 3 previous sections, they're part of Horary astrology, and it's astrology as an oracle. So when you consult a Horary astrologer, you call him and you ask, I lost my keys, where are my keys? The astrologer takes the moment you ask the question, draws a chart for it, and then he looks at where the moon, what the moon is doing in relation to the other planets and the houses, and the astrologer will tell you where your keys are, or whether you should buy this house, or whether this visitor that you receive is well-intentioned or not. And so then it has all kinds of very interesting ramifications, how you work with astrology. And so that's a short answer to your question, maybe a long answer.
Stephen, it's so complicated. It goes so deep. Have you ever studied lunar arc astrology?
No.
Yeah, I've just started, and it's a whole other wormhole too.
So, but I think that as an overview, that's pretty decent what we just gave. And then yes, there are many other things that we don't know about. What's the second question you had? Or did that answer your question well?
It did. It's very interesting. I especially like, there's a few things that stood out, but I especially like that the moon is associated with the body. Like the moon gives birth to my body. I think of the moon always as the emotional determinant or the emotional body, but I guess in its relationship to the earth and being the closest to earth, I really like that linking into the physical. And if I take an overall message away from what you said, is then that all these branches of astrology that are related to the moon are just very much, they're close to home, right? They're close to our day-to-day reality. They're not so far out in the philosophical.
Mm-hmm. The moon as an archetype, in terms of emotions, I think the moon as an archetype is really the mother archetype. When we connect with mother, we connect with moon, and in alchemy and in astrology and in ancient astrology, the moon was the mother of the sun. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, the moon is our mother. And
So what is
so,
the earth then?
hmm?
What is the earth then? If the moon is the mother.
Well, the earth is not, you know, it's not included in the astrological pantheon because the earth is the center of the zodiac system. Everything turns around the earth. So the earth in itself represents me. And of course, then the sun and the moon are my father and mothers, but
Yeah.
also aside from that, then the moon is also the mother of the sun as well. So in dealing with the archetypal world, we have to, you know, it doesn't make logical sense. It's a symbolic definition of how archetypes work. And so then in that sense, so there's no real presence of the earth itself in the astrological system because it's accounted for as being the place where I stand.
Guess
Yeah.
we also don't get a perspective of the earth because we can't see it unbiasedly, right? Like there's no seeing earth outside of us because we are confined to earth, so there's no perspective of what it's going through because we're going through it with earth as our
Yeah.
little pieces of earth in our body.
I like that. Going through it with earth. Certainly true.
So let's go to the next question.
It's good.
Yes, well, I thought I was going to ask next about the current lunation, but I think I'll leave that question for the end.
Okay.
My next question would be if and how the current lunation affects us according to our own chart. So for example, we're in Aquarius right now, the moon is in Aquarius. For me personally, Black Moon Lilith is in Aquarius. So is that, while the moon is in Aquarius, would that be highlighted in my chart? Or how does that whole the relationship play itself out?
So yeah, you want to show that and then actually show the question itself because I rephrased it a little bit. So through the lunar lens, could you elaborate on the current lunar cycle and how does the lunar cycle transits affect us? So then the next chart is the chart of the full moon. So why don't we bring that up? And so here's the chart of the full moon.
So are we gonna skip her question to later, or
The other question or what question?
she just asked about like Black Moon Lilith?
Well, no, she asked about a transiting, what happens to the moon and how does it affect a planet? So how does, you
When
know,
it's in
so
transit?
she has the black, so your Black Moon Lilith is in Leo
In Aquarius.
or in Aquarius. So then, and what degree is it?
I'm not sure right now.
So that's what you would look at, you know, so if your planet, so personally, I have Chiron at 23 degrees of Aquarius.
Okay.
And also then the sun is pretty far, but it's close enough. And then I have also Saturn that's been transiting Chiron. So, and then I have a friend right now, his sun is at 16 degrees Aquarius. So then with a planet exactly where the sun is at the full moon, then so we have the aspects are delineated by the lines, right? So the sun is in opposition to the moon, that's the full moon. And then it's in T squared to Uranus. So we have a T square of Uranus, moon, and the sun. And all that energy comes bearing on that planet. So if somebody has a planet at 15 degrees of Taurus, then they're going through a Uranus transit, and you're going to really experience that Uranus transit that much stronger at the full moon because the energy of the sun and the moon are forming a T-cross to that planet. Same thing would be with a planet at 15 degrees of Scorpio. So a planet at 15 degrees of Scorpio will receive an opposition from Uranus, 180-degree relation, and it will receive a 90-degree from the sun and a 90-degree from the moon. So that whatever a transit touches, all the planets that are aligned with that planet all come down bearing on that planet. So if your black moon Lilith would be at 16 degrees of Aquarius, then all of that full moon energy would come bearing on it. So what does that mean psychologically? What does that mean energetically? It means that your, black moon Lilith energy would be stimulated by the solar, lunar, Uranian energy. But not only that, because we have Jupiter, Chiron also make angle. So then transits are like an energetic grid. And when you look at a chart, you have all of the angles that are effective at that time. So if you superimpose that on your own chart, and that's what an astrologer does, it reads your natal chart first, and then he reads what's going on in the transiting planets. So the healer and the dreamer astrology makes uses an analogy to describe how the system works. The stage is the zodiac, the planets are the actors, the angular relationship between the planets is the dialogue, and then the transit or the unfolding of the drama. So wherever your black moon Lilith is engaged in a angular relationship with the rest of your chart, so then the transiting moon, are superimposed on that chart, and then you can see what is being triggered. Of course, that's really complex. And just as an introduction like that, did I make any sense to you?
Yes, you did make sense, though I at the same time realized just how much of a beginner I am. So basically, the degrees are important because that tells you how much superimposition there is or isn't. It's not just the sign that planets are in, and then not only the planets that are in the sign itself that the moon happens in, but also the planets that make any kind of relationship to the moon, right?
Got it.
Okay.
Make sense?
The moon,
Yes.
wherever it's at.
So if you look at for example, the Mercury-Pluto conjunction that's in the chart right now, if you have any planets in Capricorn at the end of Capricorn, the Pluto-Mercury conjunction is bearing down on that archetype, forcing it to a higher octave of expression through death and rebirth Pluto, but also through an engagement with Mercury, communication. So then you may expect during a Mercury-Pluto conjunction, triggering one of your planets to get messages from, the Lord of Hell. So then we kind of analyze the archetypal relationship between the planets as a dialogue that informs your own unfolding, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So the pressure really is just change, right?
Absolutely.
Change in those areas.
Okay, then you had another question.
Yes, and this is the main question that has come up for me as we've moved through the last year in our circle too. So all year we began to notice, and I know this is very beginner, but we really and then we really started to notice and know that the new moon and the full moon are always in opposite signs, right? And it makes sense, of course, because they're either conjunct or opposite the sun. And then we also kind of ended up looking into what that axis is about, right? And noticing that every 6 months it's flipped around. And so you're working with the same themes as we move through the overall pattern of these lunar cycles. But then I started questioning, because there's 13 lunar cycles in each year, and there's only 12 zodiacs, and where does that 13th lunar cycle fit in, and which signs would it be in? And so I've had that question for a while. I've never deeply looked into it. I couldn't really find anything coherent online. And so when I got this next year's wee moon, I actually sat down and I wrote down all of the moons and their signs. And I noticed that exactly what I suspected would have to happen at some point, that there's a doubling up. I think it's the Aries new moon. There's 2 Aries new moons coming up in March and April or something. And then after that, the full moon is offset by 1 sign. So they're not actually in opposite zodiacal constellations anymore, which I guess makes general sense to me for that calculation. But energetically and psychologically, and it just kind of threw me off on how I'm now going to work with this moon. And I guess I'm curious exactly, and maybe on your table, how that works itself out and when we switch back. And then also how, if there's any effect, and what kind of effect that would have on our inner workings in terms of that rhythm. And how can it be that they're not exactly opposite if it's still a conjunction with the sun and an opposition with the sun every month?
Well, that's
I know that's a lot of questions all in one, but that's sort of the overall topic of inquiry. And I think you reworded it, if you look back at the list of questions.
right.
And you reworded that whole topic for me, saying, can you explain the lunar cycle and the shift that is taking place this spring, and how the opposition of sun and moon will shift things, and what meaning does it hold?
Well, so, yes. So exactly, and you phrased the question really well, and it's very astute of you to have seen that. And so Dayana and I, we've been working for over a year now, and the opposition of the sun and the moon has always been in the polarity. So we have 6 polarities, right? We have the Aquarius Leo polarity, Pisces Virgo, Aries Libra, Taurus Scorpio, Gemini Sagittarius, Cancer Capricorn. That's the 6 polarities, and 3 of them are masculine and 3 of them are feminine. And that's the basic component of the zodiac. Now, when the sun and the moon meet in a sign, then that is the new moon in that sign. So a few days ago, 2 days ago, we had the new moon in Aquarius, where the moon and the sun were together in Aquarius. And then we're preparing for the full moon, where moon in Leo in opposition to the sun. So that's how it works. And that's how it's been working. So now we're entering into a phase where we're going to have 2 Aries new moon within coming up. So that means that new moon in Aries at the very beginning, see, and this next new moon that's coming up is also at 1 degree of Pisces. But because Pisces is a 28-day sign, the next new moon will be in Pisces again. But then Aries being a longer month, we'll have another new moon, and we have those 2 charts. So now what we're going to see is that the full moon of the Aries, the last Aries new moon, that full moon will be in Scorpio. So the Scorpio full moon will actually come before the Taurus new moon. And so that is a natural cycle and it's cyclical. And I was looking and I didn't have the charts for 2024 yet, but in 2024 and early 2024, we're going to have 2 full moons within one astrological sign. And then the order will come back to the right polarity.
I just had a changing moment. I think I just understood. So it's basically just the flipping. It's full moon first in that axis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're
Right?
always
So they're
gonna
not
have-
offset. It's just the order is flipped in which they come.
There's always going to be one new moon and one full moon in a sign.
Yeah.
That full moon, and when the sun is in that sign, will be in the opposition. So, and then the new moon will be in the sign itself, and that will happen. But the deep meaning here is that the full moon will be the completion of a cycle that began in the previous sign. So we'll have a new moon in Aries and a full moon in Scorpio, part of the same cycle. So what does that mean psychologically? How do we deal with that? What do we interpret? You know, because yes, we're going to be interpreting the one before that, you know, or so if you interpret the new moon in Taurus, that new moon in Taurus is a lunar cycle that will become a full moon in Sagittarius. So then now the psychological significance of that new moon and full moon changes in interpretation. You know, so a new moon in Taurus is a nurturing new moon, and the natural opposition is Scorpio, but now we're going to have a Sagittarian fiery full moon to a Taurus new moon. So then in interpretation and understanding what that's going to mean, it's going to present some very interesting challenges for us as we look at that. And so we're going to be working with that for the next year. The next time, I don't know exactly when it is, but my sense is about the same time next year, we'll have 2 full moons in the same sign, and the order will be reversed again, so that we'll have this same balance. So what we have is we have 13 moons in 12 signs. So at one particular point in a 2-year cycle, one of the months are going to have 2 new moons in 1 month, and one of the months are going to have 2 full moons in a month. And those traditionally are called blue moon, although depending on who you talk to, you know, because having 2 Aries new moon, that's really going to put a strong emphasis on the Aries archetype, you know, the Aries myth. And so, so yes, it opens up more question, but also it kind of answers your question. It's part of the cycles of the moon, and it always goes like that, and it's natural, and it's not something unique, you know. We're dealing with this all the time.
I think the last time it happened was Aquarius season 2021. When we started doing our videos, there was a double moon that time too.
And that was a double full moon, and it
Yeah.
straightened things back
Yeah.
out. So then this cycle,
So it could be Taurus or Gemini that it flips over again into next year, but
and it brings to your next question, you know, does that have to do with the nodal axis? And the second of those moon is an eclipse.
right. Oh yeah, it's gonna be so
So
cool.
that second Aries new moon is an eclipse of the sun. So it would be interesting to see, but no, because the nodal axis travels counterclockwise and takes an 18-year cycle. So this is just probably just a fluke, not a fluke, but cyclically it must happen on a regular basis, but it's kind of rare that we have two Aries new moon and the second new moon is an eclipse. So that will give special significance. And I know you asked about the eclipse season. And I think we should just do a whole video just on that because it's quite complex.
Mhm. And flips a lot this year.
Yes, I'm feeling the amount of information that we're tracking through here in this short little video. I have two little questions. I guess since the nodal axis came up, I do understand that the nodal axis and the nodes of destiny are part of a larger cycle. My question around that in regards to this was maybe just looking for an affirmation, because I've been looking up, as we've been working with these opposing signs and the new moons and the full moons, I've been looking up these axes. So like this axis that we're in right now is the axis of ego, right? Leo and Aquarius, that's what it's called when it's part of the nodes of destiny, I guess. And so I'm wondering if it's appropriate and a good thing to do to kind of apply those themes to the smaller lunar oppositional sign analysis. Like if we're in a right now in Aquarius and Leo sort of oppositional axis, are the themes between Leo and Aquarius the ones that are highlighted? In this case, like the axis of ego, the selfie and the aware self?
Absolutely, it is when the new moon and the full moon are in an axis, that axis is highlighted. I would be careful to just limit the signs to a simple definition of an axis of ego, because really the complexity of Leo versus Aquarius is the individual versus his community. And so Aquarius is about community, Leo is about the individual. And so we catch little, glimpse of definitions of these archetypal structures, and different writers will use different keywords which may not completely define the archetypal structure informed in the myth. So Leo is the struggle to become myself more fully. It is the only sign that's ruled by Leo. So it is about shining my light into the world. Yes, it can be misconstrued as ego. Leo often called egotistical, but Leo are not really purely egotistical. They just want so bad to share what they have that they're perceived as egotistical. So, and so it's difficult, and especially when we begin our studies of astrology, to accept, these concepts, and then what you got that out of books on the nodal axis?
Oh, I mostly do a broad sweep across the internet, and it's part of why I really appreciate your two's contribution to my astrological understanding, because of your being so firmly steeped in the archetypal and in the myths. I think I personally, I have such a broad mind and way of absorbing information. I don't get hung up on these keywords necessarily. They almost help me to simplify my understanding, because behind every keyword for me, there's such a huge meaning that I kind of carry with me. And at the same time, I definitely see the danger and the loss of oversimplification. So everything you just shared about Leo without knowing astrology so well, but having these archetypal understandings for me is kind of part of that. I'm not an opponent of ego either. So it's not a negative statement, though of course it can be perceived as such in today's culture. So there's just a lot of that. And I think at different times we just have to make different choices if we want to simplify or complexify something for the sake of any given container, right?
I think it's kind of like when there's a duality at play, it's always both and more. But if you put the both into one, then it can sometimes diminish the more. So it's like the parents of a child versus saying the names of the parents of the child.
Mm-hmm.
If that kind of makes sense, there's a dual structure that holds, ideally, holds the container for the growth of the child, and then the community comes around after next, kind of like the luminaries, the earth, and then the planets. And if you don't put in context who the parents are, it can kind of be confusing as to maybe who the child is. But once you put the parents into context, then you get to fill up the kind of the space. And so when you say like the axis of the ego, the first thing that comes to mind is like, I have a very complex idea of ego in my mind. But I look at astrology as actually 6, and then the dualistic nature that's pulled to allow for expression and color to come through that. And so then the Leo and the Aquarius, the self and the other, it's kind of useless without the other. Like the self is only so fulfilled as long as it can give or be in whole in community, and the community is only so beautiful and helpful and contained as long as there's a self that gets to thrive within the community, and we're not all the same. And so there's when I was doing a new moon circle for a year, I found it very helpful to take time to look at both, and then I opened it up to what came up for every individual throughout that axis that we're kind of getting stretched through and the awareness is growing from.
That's beautiful. I think that's really important also in the astrology, is that we all have different relationships with these myths and these archetypes. And so there's nothing really wrong. It's all different perspective that we have. Liz Green puts it out, in the most succinct way when she says that if you dig deep enough into an Aquarius, you're going to get a Leo. And if you dig deep enough into a Pisces, you're going to get a Virgo. So these are two sides of the same coins that are manifested in the personality. So in a sense, you really have 6 polarities that are the distincts in energy, and they all tell a different story. And the more we become familiar with the myths that inform those stories, the more we can be apt at interpreting what a planet in that particular sign will do to express itself, because that's what we do as astrologers. We try to express, but most importantly, we try to find out how the individual is living that planet, because you may have a planet in a sign, and you may have another person with the same planet in the same sign, but you're both living it differently. But it also puts the discussion into a full circle, is that now with the full moon being off-centered of the axis, we're going to have an integration of different axes that are going to make for a very interesting dialogue, because really every sign is an evolution from the previous sign, and each sign is interrelated with each other in a particular way in a grid of energy. So then the interpretation of these lunar cycles are going to confront us with really expanding our vision. So I think we can thank you for bringing that up, because you're kind of giving us a heads up on looking at this material. So in that sense, we're really grateful. I think this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I take it as the big quickening. Like it feels like it's funny to me. It starts in March and everything seems to really come to a big head of forward momentum this year. But this pattern of planting a seed and harvesting the seed, so the new moon coming and then the full moon coming in that sign, and that being how it's been for the last 12, 13 months, and then switching gears and having a full moon, and then starting every new sun sign with a full moon, and then coming into a new moon makes me feel like it's like instead of walking through Earth, we're going to start skipping, or it's like pulling us faster into the next thing. And I feel like it's like another emphasis of the quickening that's taking place.
We're going to go from a masculine axis to a feminine axis.
Except, well,
both lunars, so one's going to have a new moon here and a full moon here.
Yeah.
And then the other one's going to have a new moon here and a full moon in this axis.
Yeah.
So then we're going to have the evolution. We're going to talk about two axes. It's going to be very fascinating.
It's going to be neat.
Yeah. Far out. I hope that this was helpful and we didn't get more confusing. I like that. I have an analogy. Sometimes you ask a question and that door opens a hallway with many more doors, and so just asking a question opens this hallway, and then there's all these questions that come from it. That's kind of how astrology is. It's a lot of hallways with a lot of information.
Yes, I feel that today. There's so much. It's all very exciting, and I really appreciated and thought it very beautiful what both of you said in answer to the last question. And I don't know if we have the time, but I would have one more potentially also amateur off-putting question in relation to this. I think you touched upon it a little bit, so I might be on the right track, because when you said that, or when I realized in your explanations that basically it's a switching, it's still on the same axis, but we're now not doing new moon to full moon, but full moon to new moon for the next year or so. That was the missing piece for me. That was the part I didn't really understand. And it brings back a contemplation of mine that I've had. So when I started these moon circles, I initially had them organized so there was always a commitment for 2 circles, and I didn't do them new moon to full moon, but I did them intentionally full moon to new moon. And really my overall sense about it was that the full moon to the new moon is the feminine part of the lunar cycle. So versus the yang, and I was like, in this, we're doing lunar work and everybody's on yang, everybody's on manifesting. I want to do this with women on the yin part of things. And so by now the circle is just a continuous thing, but that sort of focus on full moon to new moon, and even I've always felt like that for myself. On full moons, I'm in full-on receptive mode. I'm really not one who can go and party much. It's way too much. So my overall sense has always been the full moon is a time for being or entering into yin and receiving whatever inside information and illumination there is. And then the time to the new moon is the time of the seeds forming that are then to be planted at the new moon. And as someone who's more at home in yin, I should say, that has been sort of my focus and with this lunar circle. So is that something maybe that will play into the coming astrology, this focus on yin? I know Chinese wise, we're moving into a yin year. You just mentioned in your answer that you're flipping from a masculine to a feminine axis. Is there maybe something in that the focus will be more often or within those, within those 2 weeks on the yin part, on the gestational part of things, and then the manifestation will kind of be jumping as Dayana weekend?
Well, if you stay with that particular mode that you've expressed, which is a really beautiful way of looking at it, then the full moon and the new moon will be in the same axis because you're starting with the full moon. So, and it's interesting to look at the full moon as the beginning of the cycle versus looking only at that waning moon versus the waxing moon. And I guess, yes, in the masculine way, we look at the new moon to the full moon, or at the, the new moon being the planting of the seed and the full moon being the reality or the giving birth. And so then you look at the giving birth as harvesting the fruit and preparing the seed for the new birth, to the new, new moon. So those are the two, so that's very interesting way of looking at that.
I think it's partly because of menstruation, because when you menstruate, for me, it's always understood like your ovulation is more your new moon time. And when you're bleeding, it's like your full moon. And so when you're menstruating in your full moon, you release, and then you're kind of coming back into yourself and you're building up energy again. And you're building energy towards being able to be ready to implant new life or set new intentions. At least that's my connection to it. Which,
yeah, I think there's many different ways of working with the moon cycle and the lunar cycle. I know for myself, I flip back and forth between new moon and full moon. In ancient times, the new moon was seen as the time to bleed together. There's a teaching around that makes sense to me. When you're bleeding on the new moon, you're in your mothering expression. When you're bleeding on the full moon, you're in your sorcerer expression. So it's another hallway to walk down to.
And fortunately or unfortunately, I don't have first-hand experience of such things.
Well, you're part of this women's circle today, Martin, and we're very grateful to have you.
I'm also very grateful to be here.
I feel like there would be so many more questions that we could jump off from here. I'm just going to check in with my sisters who are on this call from a moon circle if there's any questions they would have before we close here.
do you want to see your slides or just now?
No.
I did have a question. It's Tasha.
Hey.
Let me just go to where I wrote it. So Martin, you I just didn't manage to catch it and I wanted to write it down. You mentioned the 6 polar signs, but then you also said that 3 of them were feminine and 3 were masculine, and I wanted to ask which ones those were.
So can you see the table?
Yes, I can.
So the blue and the red colors, so the red is the masculine, the blue is the feminine. So, and they alternate. So if you start from Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, masculine axis, so Aries Libra is masculine, Taurus Scorpio is feminine, Gemini Sagittarius masculine, Capricorn Cancer feminine, Aquarius Leo masculine, Pisces Virgo feminine, and it goes with the numbers. So from the 1st to the 12th, so 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, and 11th sign of the zodiac are masculine. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12th sign of the zodiac are feminine, just in case you lose track of that.
Could you repeat that one last time? Just that last bit.
So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11th sign of the zodiac are masculine. So masculine numbers. So if you start from Aries,
So all the odd numbers.
all the odd numbers are masculine numbers. And so then all the odd numbers of the signs are masculine, and feminine, all the even numbers. So that's a quick way to know if you lose your track. But if you go from Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, the Aries Libra axis is masculine, Taurus Scorpio second is feminine, Gemini Sagittarius masculine, Cancer Capricorn feminine, Leo Aquarius masculine, and Pisces, Virgo, feminine. And I put it in separate colors so that you can see it really easily on the table.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you like this presentation, my dear?
It was really informative. A lot of, well, not a lot of it, but some of it definitely went over my head, which excites me because I feel like there's much to learn to deepen my own understanding of astrology. But it was interesting that about 3 seconds before Dayana started talking about the new moon and full moon in relation to the menstrual cycle, my mind went, I wonder exactly which sign I'm ovulating in or bleeding in. And then you said it, and it really, I made a note of it because I would like to be a bit more aware. I'm very aware of when I'm ovulating and of course when I'm bleeding, but I don't think I've ever really paid attention to what sign the moon is in at that time. And I'm really excited to be aware of that this coming year for sure.
That's exciting. Like Tara said, I find almost all women I've connected with over the years find that they flip. So it'd be neat to see where you're at now and then see where you're at by next winter and see when and if you flip.
Yeah, we'll do.
Cool.
Is there another question from the circle? It doesn't look like it. I have one more question for Dayana, actually. I know you talk about the salts. What are they called?
Tissue salts or cells.
Yeah. And every time you say that, I'm very curious, and I'm gonna come and see you at the community farm store and talk about that more. But I'm also wondering if you or anyone does, if you can like relate your astrological chart to the tissue salts, like for your own consumption, if that's how you work with them, and if so, if that's something you do.
I've been spending the last couple of years witnessing it. In 2020, I took that time of outside of work, no extra stuff going on, to really dive in more. And so the last 2-3 years, I've just been really taking the time to witness what the patterns are and how it all comes together. And also, it's one thing to take in information and ideas, and then it's another thing to see what actually pans out. And so I wouldn't say like I'm happy to play with it with you, but I don't feel like proficient in definitive work with it. I will say that I've seen a lot of cool correlations over the years now of witnessing a lot of health issues that definitely come in cycles throughout the community at the same time. And I've also dabbled a bit now in medical astrology and witnessing when there's hard aspects in certain signs and what's holding a hard aspect, or where maybe the psyche has put something in the shadow or the subconscious. Like Martin said, everyone has maybe 2 people of the same Mars or Venus sign, and yet in different relationship to each other, it can kind of go in the back burner subconscious and not show itself as much. I'm witnessing more of how that can show up with the tissue salts, and how when you have this maybe aspect of your psyche that is repressed, that the tissue salts can help to balance out how that's affecting the body.
Well, I'm very, very excited about getting in touch with you about that, because I'm really struggling with some recurring health things, and I do see them be part of a larger communal pattern too. So I very much resonate with and hope that that's part of the answer for me. And
love to connect soon about that. That'd be wonderful. And I'm excited to hear about the cranial sacral. I'd love to connect with you about that. I've never done it, and yet I've been really very curious for a long time. So maybe we can do some exchanges coming up.
yes, that sounds delightful. Let's. Okay, so before I close us here, is there anything else, Martin or Dayana, that you would like to add?
So, just for the name of the video, so, you know, a lunar circle with Regina Terra, does that make sense?
I call them moon circles.
Moon circle.
I guess I could, yeah, if anyone's interest has been sparked, you're welcome to reach out. We'll link all of the contact information under the video. The circles are free of charge. We're just contributing to the Zoom account costs. So anyone that is female identifying is welcome to join. Of course, we have Martin here in his mothering hen self today as a nice little addition. We would love to have you. So just reach out. And if you're interested in any of my other services, I can be found through my website, sacred-journeys.ca. And by dash, I mean that little connecting thing. I don't know what it's called. It will
Wonderful.
also be linked. I'm sure we can link all that information.
Cool.
And there's a couple of Facebook websites, both for events in the Dome here and for my craniosacral offerings. So anyone who would like to reach out, please do so. Your information is accessible.
We'll put it up. But just as an anecdote, a little story in terms of your love of the moon and your work with the moon, there's a chapter in Jung's Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is Jung's like magnum opus, deals with a lot with astrology and with alchemy. There's a chapter called Rex and Regina. And so Rex and Regina, or Regina, like in the Latin way, is the sun and the moon,
Oh, interesting.
the king and the queen. So Regina being the queen. And so then you, in that sense, you carry that name very well.
Look at the card I pulled today.
Ah,
Circle.
beautiful, beautiful.
And it is Regina, please.
Regina?
Yes, in the German pronunciation, or as German as people can handle.
Regina.
Regina, yes.
Regina.
Yes.
Okay, you
Thank
got
you.
it.
Oh, Terra, Regina Terra, it's kind of the dual nature. In my recent visits to Germany, I really got in touch with and owned that German Canadian identity of mine. And I realized in that context that even my name, Regina Terra, is kind of an expression of that dual nature. So I was given the name Terra in ceremony at some point, and it's become my go-by name here in my Canadian life. At the same time, I never rejected Regina as a name. And so Regina Terra is really my unified self that is, both and neither, and at home very much in the in-between.
Love that.
Well, it's always wonderful sharing space with you, and I'll let you get back to your circle. I hope that we didn't bore everybody to death. And
Well, I believe that it was very valuable, not just to us, but to anyone who's going to tune in at any time.
indeed.
Thank you both so much for taking the time of preparation and for offering your space and your presence. And I'm looking forward to the next round of teachings. We have many doors and many hallways to cover, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now the